Hello, everyone, and welcome to Growing Together, a gardening podcast with me, John Lamb, and Don Kinsler, a lifelong gardener and the North Dakota State University Extension horticulturist for Cass County. Don, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, and Happy New Year to all our listeners.
It's good to be back.
It is, and the days are getting longer, noticeably. Well, maybe it's only a couple of minutes each day, but I am seeing the sun getting a little higher on the horizon, slightly.
Yeah.
And I am looking through seed catalogs because I can feel spring coming, because it will be in less than a month. I'll be starting begonia seeds inside and onion seeds. I start in February. And so it's awesome. I can see spring from here.
It's a nice feeling, isn't it?
It is. It is great. And
it's good to have something to look forward to. Here we are, we're in the first third of the month, but we're already seeing kind of a January thaw. It gives you hope, and we know it'll get cold again. We know that'll happen. That's the way it goes. But there's a feeling of hope.
There is, and much of the region has a decent layer of snow,
right? Which
is nice, because I actually had to I had to modify my rabbit fencing because the snow had kind of blown over part of it, and so a rabbit got underneath and inside. And so, the rabbit in the meantime got back out again, but after it had nibbled some stuff. So anyway, I needed to remodify my snow fence a little bit, my protective fence. And so I needed to drive a wooden stake in, and it actually pounded down into the ground.
Oh, really?
Because I believe we had gotten snow, at least in the Fargo area, early enough before much frost had penetrated the ground. Now, I haven't checked the data to see how far the frost is into the ground, but I was actually able to, with a good-sized sledgehammer, pound down in. It didn't take that much pounding to get a stake into the ground. Okay. So the rabbit fence is back intact.
Good.
And life is good.
Good. We're back in the gardening world. Yes. We're going to talk today about some of the verbiage, some of the words, some of the kind of the unique phrases.
I love gardening terms. Some of these gardening terms are so non-intuitive. It's like there's a language all its own. Garden speak. And I oftentimes think, people that are maybe new to gardener, kind of just new to gardening, or maybe just kind of learning about gardening, they hear some of these terms and they're just quirky. And so I thought it'd be fun today to kind of go into and list and define some of these gardening terms that aren't always so straightforward.
Right. Well, we're really looking forward to talking about that. But first, you've got a letter from a listener.
I do. Ryan wrote in and said, I moved from a location where I had Canadian red rhubarb for almost 20 years. It was a great plant. Is there something new, or should I just stick with a good old tried and true type? Signed, Ryan. And thanks, Ryan, for writing in. And rhubarb. We take rhubarb seriously in this part of the country. Right. We don't mess around when rhubarb is concerned. And of course, why not have the best type, the nicest type that one can grow? And so I appreciate, Ryan, that you're thinking about, is there something better than the tried and true? And Canadian red is a good red-stalked rhubarb that's been around a long, long time. And so I mentioned to Ryan then, when I replied back to him, I mentioned, if that's performed well for you, that's a good old standard. Nothing wrong with sticking with it. And another one that's been around a long time is Valentine. Now, the main difference in rhubarb types, that people have growing, is one of the main differences is color. There are red varieties that have noticeably red stalks. There are other varieties that have more of a green stalk, or kind of half red, half green. And also you'll notice the difference in the size, the diameter of the stalk. Some of the red varieties, such as the one I've got, I inherited it from my mom, who got it from her mom. I have no idea what the named variety of it was, but it's a good red stalk, but they're a thinner stalk than some of the rhubarb I've seen. Some of the, especially the greener types, have a very large diameter stalk, so difference in diameter. Now, it's interesting. When people are kind of comparing rhubarb varieties, you oftentimes hear people say that the red types are sweeter, that they don't require quite as much sugar. well, I think most rhubarb recipes, I think you got to add sugar to almost
quite a bit of sugar,
any of them. And so I've always heard that, the red varieties don't require as much sugar. I thought, well, okay, is there some scientific evidence that shows that? In this program, John, we're all about truth, aren't we? We got to get to the bottom of things. And, okay, I've always heard that since I was a little boy. Okay, but is there anything, has anybody actually tested these different rhubarb varieties to see, is one sweeter than another, less acidic? So I went searching for a reputable scientific site. It wasn't easy to find, but I did find a reference, a 3-year study that had been done by, I got to get the name straight. It was published in the National Library of Medicine, and it analyzed Canadian Red, Valentine, both those are planted a lot. One called Red Champagne, I wasn't familiar with that. One called Poncho, which was kind of green, and Victoria. Victoria has been planted a lot in this area too. It's a little more greenish red in it. But okay, it's interesting what they found. What they found is that the Canadian Red and the Valentine Red actually had lower sugar content than the greener types.
Oh, really?
So I don't know, is when we look at the red and we love the color, does it kind of imaginary make it taste sweeter? Okay, but so they found that the highest sugar content and lowest acid was one called Red Champagne, which kind of has a pinkish red coating on the stalks, but inside is pretty green. Red Champagne, Red Champagne had the highest sugar content, lower acid. Now I looked up, I had never heard of Red Champagne. I do see a few sites that are listing it for sale. So anyway, but they were quick to know. They were quick to note that the year they did this a 3-year study. Okay, the climate, the weather, how much moisture, the heat does affect how much sugar content builds up in rhubarb.
Okay,
and also the rhubarb harvested earlier in the season had less sugar in it on all these varieties than the rhubarb that was harvested later in the season. And so there was a difference in that as well. So now it's interesting. I'm not going to give up my beautiful red rhubarb because it looks so nice in a pie or a crisp. Some of the greener types are a little more grayish when they're cooked. I know you can add food coloring or strawberry jello or something, but I still like my red variety. And if you need a tish less sugar in the green varieties, well, okay, I'm okay with adding a little more. But it makes for an interesting kind of a study on that. I might try to locate some Red Champagne rhubarb and just see how that stacks up. It'd be kind of fun to do a blind taste test on some of these where you don't actually see which of the colors you're eating.
Well, and rhubarb is something that if you plant it this year, you have to wait 2 years to harvest it.
Right, yeah. Let it grow the first year, let it grow the second year, harvest the third year. But then you're going to have it for the next 100 years. Yeah.
So one thing if you're interested in before you plant it, maybe pick up some from the farmer's market. Go around to the farmer's market and see what kinds they have. Find the one that you like, and then figure out how to get that plant.
Especially if they can tell you what variety it is. Exactly. Which likely they probably know what variety it is. They probably know what variety it is that they actually ordered and planted. So anyway, like I say, we take our rhubarb seriously in this part of the country. So again, Ryan, thanks for writing. And anyone who would like to write in like that with a success story or a challenge, send us an email, donald.kinsler, KINZLER, @ndsu.edu.
All right. Well, Don, before we jump into the show, I wanted to check back on something. probably about a month ago,
Yeah, what's that?
You had a listener who said that they had planted amaryllis bulbs in their yard and they had good luck with that. And then you had another listener follow up and say that she was going to go around after the holidays and buy up all of the remaining bulbs.
I forgot to do it.
Let's check back with her and see how. Let's see if she was able to pick up a bunch of bulbs. And let's check back with her this
forgot
year.
to go around. I totally forgot to go around right after Christmas to see if there were some bargains on amaryllis. Maybe it's still not too late. Maybe they still got some on the shelf.
Yeah.
Maybe they're close to giveaway by now. I totally forgot. I will check with Sandra was her name. Yep. I am going to check to see if she scored a bunch of amaryllis bulbs.
Yeah, that would be fun. That would be a fun project to kind of keep our eye on all year.
It will. We picked up some extra Christmas lights on the cheap, but I forgot to look for the amaryllis bulbs. Well, thanks for reminding me.
That's okay. Well, let's talk about these gardening terms. You came in with a list of some kind of, like you said, quirky, some kind of gardening terms that may not make sense on face value, that maybe that there's something else behind the term.
And for people that have gardened a long time, these terms just roll off their tongue. I remember my mom using some of those things. I remember she mentioned that Aunt Margaret was going to give Grandma a slip. Well, I thought, what? She was playing hide and seek. She's going to give her the slip,
right.
Or somebody had fallen on the ice. But as we mentioned a little later, that's a term, older term. You still hear it for a cutting. So anyway, some of these are so non-intuitive, and so it's kind of fun to discuss because you do hear them. And so I always emphasize to people that, especially if you're talking to people that are just discovering gardening, make sure that you don't assume that people are speaking the same language that you are. Now, a good example is an amendment. That's not part of the Constitution.
Right.
An amendment is something that we add to soil to improve it. Maybe it's peat moss, maybe it's compost, something like that. How about escape? Do you know what an escape is?
An escape?
Escape.
Well, I believe it's a Ford vehicle. I know it's a getaway.
That's true. Or maybe a prisoner making a run for it.
Right.
But an escape means a plant has begun to spread uncontrollably out of its intended bounds. For example, if you plant mint, it might well escape.
Yep.
Okay, now classic examples of escapes, dandelions and crabgrass were both planted by well-intentioned people in North America here on the East Coast. They've escaped. And now the entire continent is covered in dandelions and crabgrass. So a classic example of escapes.
In my yard, it's snow on the mountain.
It's escaped.
Yes, it is. It is, and it's grown and grown and grown, and it's extended beyond. It's quite vigorous.
Yes, and that leads us to the next term, invasive.
Okay.
Yes, the snow on the mountain. That has a couple of names, doesn't it?
Bishop's
weed, goutweed.
Yeah.
So that's invasive.
Okay.
Yes. So invasive is a plant type that spreads vigorously either by seed, roots such as the snow on the mountain, or stems with the potential of growing uncontrollably. So it'd be interesting to see. I wonder what would happen if you just let the snow on the mountain kind of have its way. You might have an entire yard.
I think eventually it would.
Snow on the mountain. It's funny. We're funny people. Okay, we want things like that. That's a ground cover. Mm-hmm. It does well in the shade. Okay, we're funny people, us humans. We want a ground cover to grow quickly and thrive. As snow on the mountain does, but we'd like it to have the good sense to stop right where we would like it to stop. So we are funny. Okay, another one that I enjoy a term is rest period. Okay, now sometimes after a long afternoon of weeding, I could use a rest period.
Right.
But now when we talk about that a bulb needs a rest period, we're referring it means that it's a period of dormancy, oftentimes in a bulb, and that's required before active growth begins. Okay, for example, tulips. Okay, tulips need a rest period. So you plant tulips in the fall, and even if you water them, give them all the good conditions, they do not start growing right away. They have a necessary rest period, and after that rest period, which is a couple of months or so. And then when the weather warms in the spring, the rest period, they've had their rest period, so they start growth. So some plants or seeds need that rest period in order to start growing. So one that I love, a favorite gardening term is when your perennials, or maybe it's your strawberry plants, they heave. It doesn't mean they've had an upset stomach. When a perennial heaves, it means that there probably hasn't been much snow cover. And during the winter time, there's freezing, thawing. The action of that freezing and thawing, contraction, expansion, tears the roots. And without that root support or strength, the plant can just be literally lifted out, heaved out of the ground. And so they can be damaged or killed on that. So love that one. And another one, self-cleaning. Self-cleaning doesn't only mean your oven, but self-cleaning can refer to usually an annual. It means that it sheds its old flowers cleanly.
Okay.
Petunias. So oftentimes the newer varieties of petunias, many of the wave types, on the tag, it will say they're self-cleaning. So, when a new gardener looks at it and says, well, self-cleaning, what, don't they get dust on the leaves or something? But self-cleaning means that it's going to shed those petals, and it's not going to form a seed head that needs deadheading. Okay, so, that brings up the next term. Okay, what do we mean by deadheading? Remember, like in school, you were never supposed to define something with a word that needed defining itself. You weren't supposed to embed another confusing word. So when I say a self-cleaning plant doesn't need deadheading, we probably better describe what deadheading
We're
means.
not talking about fans of the Grateful Dead anymore, are we?
No, exactly. Yeah. And so a deadhead means, and this is a term you hear frequently. You'll say, oh gosh, I better go out and deadhead my peonies. And so deadheading refers either an annual or a perennial. It means that after the flower has withered, that you cut off that spent blossom. There's another word. Spent blossom means a withered old blossom. You cut that blossom off before it produces seed. See, in both annuals or perennials, the seed formation can take away the energy from the plant. And also, they just look kind of ragged. On a peony, after all the petals are dropping, you got that old flower sitting there. And so deadheading not only helps the energy of the plant, but deadheading also helps clean up the plant, make it look better. And so petunias, the nice thing, the newer varieties don't need deadheading. We don't have to be out there meticulously taking off all the little spent flowers on those.
Are they self-cleaning, or do they just their process does not require it?
Oh, yeah. Now we're getting into the nitty-gritty. So in some cases, they are sterile. So they just don't set seed. They don't produce seed. So then in other cases, sometimes that seed head just kind of withers away on its own and everything just kind of falls off. So yeah, it's interesting, the process of deadheading, self-cleaning, what causes the self-cleaning. And so it's fascinating. I mentioned too the terms then annual or perennial. And so for people just starting out in gardening, what exactly is an annual or a perennial? Now, an annual is a plant that only lives for one growing season and then the winter kills it. Okay, and a perennial, on the other hand, lives for year after year. If it's a perennial that's winter hardy in your area, it's going to grow on and on and on. So annuals, and of course, sometimes when you talk about annuals, like in the garden center, they're talking about annual flowers, such things such as marigold, petunias, zinnias. They're all annuals. They're going to live for the one season and then die. Perennials, iris, daylily, peonies, things that are going to live forever and ever. There's another one tossed in there that sometimes you'll see, biennial. Biennials mean that they grow one season, survive winter, come back the second season, biennial 2. The second season, then that's when they produce their flower or seed.
Okay.
And for example, carrots, if a carrot overwinters, same with onions, if a carrot or an onion survives winter in your garden and comes up that second year is when it produces its seed head on that. So kind of interesting. As long as we're talking about perennials, you'll oftentimes hear the term that something is a tender perennial. Now, it doesn't mean it's soft-hearted or has its feelings hurt easily, but a tender perennial means that it's not quite winter hardy for the area that you're going to put it in. So maybe the hardy hibiscus. Have you got one of those in your yard yet?
No.
The hardy hibiscus, the tropical hibiscus, not winter hardy, but there is a perennial hardy hibiscus and a great big huge dinner plate size flowers. I planted one of those this last year. Hopefully,
and the flowers only last like one day, right? Or they last a short period.
They last for a period.
Okay.
But they keep forming more flowers, so it's got a pretty good extended. But anyway, the winter hardy hibiscus is definitely a tender perennial. Planted maybe in a protected spot, not on a windswept hillside that doesn't get any snow. But so a tender perennial is another one that sometimes a term you hear. Another term that you'll hear in gardening books is that something is a short-lived perennial. Well, what does that mean? I thought perennials live kind of like forever. Well, perennials can be kind of categorized like humans. Not all humans have the same lifespan. And so some perennials just don't last as long. Coneflower. Coneflower, you rarely see somebody that's had a coneflower for 100 years, okay? Coneflower, maybe 3, 4, 5 years, and then they just don't come back. Delphiniums can be like that. Many of the dianthus types, 3, 4, 5 years, maybe then they just don't come back. Long-lived perennials, peonies. There are lots of peonies in this area that have lived 100 years. Daylily, iris, hosta, long-lived perennials. So even though things are perennials, they're kind of subsets within that group. And so why don't we take a break, John, and then let's continue on with some of these.
That sounds good.
Get 6 months of local news for just $2. You get unlimited access to the news and information you need to stay connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe to get 6 months of local news for just $2.
All right, we're back, and this week we're talking about some kind of interesting terms in gardening, some things that maybe need a little bit of explaining.
Cutting back. Now after Christmas and New Year's, I need to cut back. I need to shed a few pounds.
Cut back on our cookie intake.
Yes. Okay, but cutting back in the plant world means that we're reducing the height of a plant. We're cutting it back. Oftentimes it'll be dramatically. For example, a dogwood does well if you cut it back or prune it back, oftentimes very low to the ground, maybe 3, 4, 5 inches to get it to branch better. So oftentimes cutting back a plant means that you're giving it a new lease on life. You're trying to encourage better growth. For example, if a coleus, it starts, by the middle of season, maybe a coleus has gotten kind of a little rangy or rambly. Cutting back can encourage it. Sometimes petunia varieties, by middle of summer, if they're getting a little leggy, cutting back can help stimulate some new growth. And it's similar to pinching. Pinching. Sometimes you'll hear that petunias, when you plant them out, benefit from pinching. And this is a term that I heard my mom say a lot. When she would plant her petunias out in either a container or the flower bed, she would always pinch them. Now, that means taking the thumb and forefinger and pinching out the central growing point of that plant. Okay, well, why did my mom pinch her petunias, and why do I do it? Well, because I learned from my mom how it works. So if you pinch out that petunia, the central point of the petunia, it causes a bunch of side growth to start. And so instead of one shoot, you've got multiple shoots, and it made the petunia plant so much bigger. Similar is true with like coleus. If you pinch the coleus when you first plant it, you'll get all these side shoots coming and you get a much healthier plant.
It looks a bit more full too, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you get more a fuller plant, more capable of bloom then, because you're getting bloom on all these fuller side shoots as well. And, I remember clearly when my mom would do this, okay, so she was planting out these flowers, maybe it was a zinnia, and it would have a bloom on top, and she would pinch it off. I thought, oh my gosh, isn't that what we want? We want them blooming. But she would pinch those off when she set it out to allow the energy to go into the plant. And then it would produce a much bigger plant. So yeah, you sacrifice a bloom, but overall then you get a much bigger, healthier, much more bloom. And so I learned early the value of pinching plants, especially plants you're transplanting out in the spring, annual plants.
And you only do the blooms and the flowers. You leave the leaves intact to collect all that energy.
Exactly. Yep. So although when you're pinching out the central growing point, like
Right.
a petunia, you're getting that little kind of cluster in the middle of it. You're probably removing a
Maybe
few
take
of the
some.
leaves,
Yeah.
taking off a few. But yeah, generally you're leaving the bigger established leaves on and you're pinching out that growing point. So again, if you told somebody, oh gosh, well, do you pinch your petunias? They may not know what exactly you're talking about. So it's fun to describe some of these. Oh, another term that I just love is setting out. I remember my mom saying, and these terms are still used frequently. You read them out in garden books. I remember mom saying, well, I think it's time we set out the tomato plants. Okay, well, what? Set out in the sun in the driveway, set out on the sidewalk, set out on the back porch. But setting out is a long-held term for transplanting those plants out into the garden or flower bed. So if you're setting out your petunias, you're taking those petunia plants out of the 4-pack or 6-pack and you're transplanting them out into the flower bed. So when you set out your cabbage plants, you're taking the little cabbage transplants and you're planting them out into the vegetable garden. So again, if somebody says, well, gosh, when do you set out your tomato plants? They may not know exactly what you're talking about. And chlorosis, it sounds like a liver ailment,
Right.
doesn't it? But chlorosis refers to a yellowing of the leaves. Now, that term is usually used in association with iron deficiency, like on maples in our area. In heavy Red River Valley soils, maples will oftentimes develop yellow leaves. The veins may remain kind of green, but in between the veins, a distinct yellowing, and that's called a chlorosis. And when it's due to the inability of the maple to get iron out of the soil, it's called iron deficiency chlorosis. So sometimes iron deficiency and chlorosis is used kind of interchangeably. Also, kind of a derivative of that word is chlorotic. So if a plant is chlorotic, it has chlorosis and the yellowing of leaves. Another term I love is an eye. Potatoes have eyes. I can't resist. I can't resist the potato joke. What did one potato say to the other? I only have eyes for you. And you also see in peonies the buds down in the roots. The buds, and of course, if you dig up a peony root, such as in the fall at transplanting time, you'll see these very visible buds on the roots. Those are termed eyes. So you'll oftentimes see in peony literature to make sure when you replant them that the uppermost eye is only 1.5 inches below soil surface. So, of course, when you're reading that, you need to know what an eye is on that. So I wonder where some of these terms developed. I'd be curious where that happened. Another one of my favorites, cross. Cross doesn't mean that I'm irritable. Cross means taking pollen from one flower and transferring it to another flower. So plant breeders, when they're trying to develop all these wonderful new varieties that we have, they will make crosses. So they take the pollen from one plant and move it on to the flower of another. They want to combine the best characteristics of each plant. So they'll do these crosses. They'll develop a seed, and those seeds planted out might make a new plant, good plant. Not always, but they'll watch the seedlings that came from that cross, and if there's a really good one, then we have a new variety, all resulting from a cross. Now, Mary and I had a greenhouse for about 25 years, and so this was a term that you heard daily, flat. Now, it wasn't because my vehicle had a hole in the tire, but a flat is the standard greenhouse term for a tray.
Okay.
You know, the tray in which plants are grown, a flat. So how many flats of petunias did we grow? How many flats of tomatoes did we need to produce? So a standard greenhouse flat was 10 inches by 20 inches. Okay, now why so definite? Okay, well, because in the standard greenhouse flat, and now they're plastic, old-fashioned ones were actually wood before plastic was invented, but a 10-inch by 20-inch standard flat, that is the flat, that's the tray in which exactly 12 4-packs or 12 6-packs fit. So they fit precisely, uniformly in there, and so that's standard in the greenhouse tray. So, sometimes you'll hear them kind of just called a tray. But anyway, around the greenhouse tray, if they ask you, would you like a flat of petunias? They're referring to that whole tray full. And sometimes you'll see at the garden centers advertised, a certain dollar amount for a flat.
Right.
And so that refers to that whole tray full of plants.
And sometimes there will be a flat sale.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. So that's kind of neat. Now, I remember when I mentioned pinching or cutting back, that it results in a bunch of side shoots, a fuller plant. Well, those are called breaks. Okay. So you'll oftentimes hear in gardeners talk, or in literature, they'll say, "Oh, wow, that plant has a lot of good breaks." And so breaks refers to it's maybe been cut back or pinched back, and it has encouraged all these side shoots to form, and those side shoots are called breaks. Now, I mentioned slip. Yeah, slip. My mom never referred to, let's take cuttings of our houseplants. She always said, we're going to take some slips. I don't know where that term ever originated or how, but my mom's generation always called the cuttings slips. I mentioned Aunt Margaret was going to give Grandma a slip. I think it was probably a geranium cutting off of one of hers. So kind of a fun term. Another term that is kind of fascinating to me is thinning. I need to thin out my carrots. So what exactly does thinning out mean? Okay, well, many of our vegetables in our gardens, we seed them, and they oftentimes come up too thick. It's interesting. I have tried seeding a row of vegetables precisely so that I wouldn't have to thin them out. Okay, so I've tried, like with carrots, I've tried the seed sowing them very thinly, but it's kind of like Murphy's Law of seeding in a garden. Okay, if you seed them really thin at what the eventual spacing should be, then it's like they don't all grow and they're way too far apart. If I seed them a little thicker, then it seems like they all grow, and then it's like hair on a dog's back. They aren't going to do anything, so I need to thin them out. So that's what's interesting. There's an old term, seed them thick and thin them quick. Okay, so thinning means, you've got a row of carrots, maybe it's a row of radishes. They all came up thick as hair on a dog's back. They aren't going to do anything if they're left like that because they're going to outcompete. The carrots would have roots that would be pencil-sized diameter, if that. So they need space to grow. And so most plants in a row, carrots, radish, have to be at least an inch apart. So thinning means that you get down on your hands and knees or my kneeling bench, and you remove the thickest ones, leave maybe the healthiest little ones, and do them when they're quite little. Maybe the plants are only an inch high, but you give the remaining ones the space. And you can use the thinnings in soups or salads, or put it on a sandwich as almost like little sprouts. So that's kind of fun too. Dust. Now, dust isn't what accumulates in your house if you've neglected your housework.
Not just, at least.
Exactly. But dust refers to insecticides that are powder-like.
Okay.
So oftentimes when you're going to apply an insecticide, you have choice. Do you want to use a wettable type, a liquid, or do you want dust? So if I'm going to go out and dust my cabbage, it means I'm applying a powder-like material to them. Now, volunteer. Okay, if a plant is a volunteer out in your yard, it doesn't mean it's donating its time to you. A volunteer plant means that it's just come up on its own. Volunteer trees.
Yes.
I got lots of volunteer trees. Almost all of them are not where I want a tree,
right?
Because they'll pop up in the middle of my peony plant, and I don't want an elm tree in the middle of my peony plant. So a volunteer tree is something growing. You didn't plant the seed. Sometimes squirrels will plant an acorn or something, so you'll have a little volunteer oak. Well, if the squirrel planted it in the right area, that'd be kind of fun. Okay. Now, some plants self-seed. That's another term you see a lot on gardening, that certain plants will self-seed, which oftentimes that's not a good thing. For example, I grew the herb borage, and it self-seeds, which means it popped up all over everywhere I didn't want it. I didn't necessarily want it to self-seed. Now, dill will self-seed. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that's good because I don't need to plant dill. It self-seeds. So each year I got some dill coming up. And so self-seeding can be good. A weed. I oftentimes get emails with photos, and people ask, is this a weed? Well, I don't think in the history of plants worldwide, I don't think there was a category of weeds that just, let's louse humans up by having a category of plants in the mix that they're just weeds. All plants have a purpose somewhere. So a weed is defined as any plant growing where you don't want it. Okay, now if a rose is suckering all over the place, those rose suckers growing out in the middle of my peony, those are weeds. And so anyway, weed is, I guess, in the eye of the beholder.
So can a weed be a volunteer?
Yes.
Okay. And then a volunteer, you use the term sucker.
A volunteer could also be a weed.
Yes. You use the term sucker. Like, I know that as like from growing off of certain trees.
Oh, another term we should. Yeah. I defined a term by using a term that needs defining.
But a sucker is a sucker different from a volunteer? Because they tend to be growing. They're not always, I guess, growing off of a tree they are an extension, aren't they?
A volunteer could probably be a sucker. A volunteer could probably be a seed grown, a seed that was dropped. But a volunteer could probably be a sucker. For example, if a rose is suckering up a ways from the mother plant, then that I guess could be considered a volunteer
is one
rose.
That tends to have.
Sure, sumac that suckers out. Yeah, okay. So I guess those could be a volunteer. So sometimes, so a sucker is a new plant that is developed from an underground kind of rhizome runner. It's connected to the mother plant,
as opposed to a volunteer could be like from a seed
that has no physical connection.
Right.
To the mother plant. Wait, we're really getting into it now.
Yes.
No, John.
We are getting into the weeds.
Yes. Okay, media. Now, John, you're in the media.
I'm in the media.
You're in the newspaper, TV.
Media.
This is media, a radio. But in gardening speak, media is not that. Media is what something is growing in. Maybe it's a seed starting media. Maybe it's a potting mix. So media is what you grow something in. Now, a term that I like is bolting. You'll see that a lot on descriptions of lettuce or spinach. It will say, this spinach variety is slow to bolt. Well, what does that mean? Bolting means that a plant, especially lettuce, spinach, will start sending up a seed stalk, a kind of a flowering seed stalk. And when those vegetables bolt and start producing seeds, then they get bitter. Usually that happens when the summer gets hot. And so a spinach, I think there's actually a variety called slow bolt, When spinach is bolt or lettuce, it's not a good thing. So you don't want those to bolt.
We were talking about rhubarb earlier. I've noticed that rhubarb will bolt. Yeah.
Rhubarb will bolt. Heavy soil. Heavy soil doesn't mean it's difficult to lift. Heavy soil just means it has a lot of clay content, and it packs heavily. It's poorly drained. Water doesn't shed easily off of a heavy soil. So heavy soil just denotes one has a lot of clay in it. It'll stick to your shoes, as opposed to a light soil, which tends to have more sand, better drainage, and it just, a sandy soil might physically weigh as much as a clay soil. A bucket of sand is pretty heavy, but it kind of refers to the porosity of the soil, heavy versus light soil. And a person sees that in plant descriptions. Sometimes a perennial will say it does not like heavy soil. So you might need to add an amendment, such as peat moss or compost, to make that heavy soil lighter on that. And an heirloom. Now, an heirloom, we see that a lot in seed catalogs, that a variety is an heirloom. Now, this isn't your grandma's porcelain teacup collection, but an heirloom refers to varieties, either flower or vegetable, that were developed before hybrids. Okay. Now, the first hybrid vegetable, anyway, was a burpee tomato hybrid developed sometime in the maybe late 1940s. So if a variety is called an heirloom, basically it's a variety that's kind of before World War II, before maybe the mid-1940s. So heirloom varieties are kind of old traditional varieties. Many people like heirloom varieties. They might feel that they have a characteristic that some of the modern varieties don't. Some of the modern varieties have advantages, such as maybe more disease resistant. So there's room in the gardening world for both heirlooms and the modern hybrids. Wet feet. You do see this in description of perennials, shrubs, and trees, that a plant does not, especially if it does not like this, that a plant does not like wet feet. That means if the soil stays continually too wet, that plant may die. A classic example is lilacs. Lilacs are wonderful, winter hardy, easy to grow, unless they have wet feet. If it's in a poorly drained location that stays too wet too long, lilacs will die. I planted lilacs at the back of our lot where the water drains. Even though it didn't stay constantly with standing water, those lilacs died. So I learned firsthand lilacs don't like wet feet. It just stayed a little too damp for lilacs' liking.
Similarly, there's terms like cool feet or shaded feet for things like clematis, things that like where the base of the plant should be a little bit more shaded, should get less direct sun.
A good example, John, that clematis likes its head in the sun and its feet in the shade.
That's the saying. Yes,
exactly.
Yes. Okay, good. Well, let's take another break. When we come back, we'll come back with more terms, more words that may need a little explaining in the garden.
If you're loving this podcast, be sure to check out our full lineup. From news and local politics to sports and true crime, find your next great listen right now at inforum.com/podcasts. That's inforum.com/podcasts.
All right, we're back, and we're this week we're going over some kind of unique gardening phrases, some gardening terms, maybe even some gardening words that may not.
I love gardening terminology.
Yeah, these are things that may not make sense to.
Kind of a unique language.
Yeah. I mean, everything has its own little parlance, and in gardening, we're going to go over
like
some
secret handshakes among gardeners. You could be talking gardening speak, and then maybe someone else would think it's a foreign language.
Right. Well, speaking of that, what does established mean?
Established, that doesn't mean you've been part of the community for a long time. It means a plant that has developed a root system and has started new growth, and it has established itself in its new location. For example, an apple tree that you plant in spring might take the entire growing season to become established, to set down its roots firmly in the ground, and so that you can't just yank it out. And so it has established. So kind of an important part. And of course, perennials, you need them to establish well before wintertime. A term that I absolutely love because it is so non-intuitive is the tops of perennials. Okay, now what is the top of a tree? Well, the top of a tree is the top of a tree, way up on top. The top of a building is at the top of a building. Okay, when we talk about cutting back the tops of perennials, are we cutting back the part way up at the top? No, we're cutting back the entire plant above ground level down to about 1 inch. For example, I get a kick out of that because if somebody said, talk about a building, we're going to remove the top of that building. Well, if you remove the entire building down to ground level, I think someone might be upset.
There's no more building.
There's no more building. But perennial, when you say I'm going to cut back the tops, usually in spring after winter, you cut back the tops, okay? So that means you're cutting it all the way down to about 1 inch above ground level. So I just get a kick out of that, the tops of a perennial, because someone may be not familiar with that term when you say, okay, in the spring is a good time to cut back the tops of most perennials. Well, a new gardener might just go back and trim kind of the upper tops of those. For example, an ornamental grass, you need to cut it down to about 1 inch above ground level and get rid of that old haystack. But if you were told to cut back the tops and you thought it was just way up at the top, you wouldn't be accomplishing the task. So that's one of the classic ones that I just chuckle over, the tops of a plant. Well, we've talked about getting perennials to winter, tender perennials. Well, microclimate in a yard. A microclimate is kind of a little favored area within a yard. A spot where they maybe has some wind protection, maybe the snow accumulates a little better. A microclimate is a spot that maybe a plant that's a little, not fully winter hardy or a little tender is a spot where you could plant. The next term I love is a heavy feeder. Oftentimes you'll see in descriptions of perennials or the flowering type shrubs especially that a plant is a heavy feeder. Now geraniums are heavy feeders, meaning they bloom better if they're getting good fertilizer. So the more you fertilize your geraniums, because they're heavy feeders, the better they're going to bloom. And roses are heavy feeders. Tomatoes, heavy feeders. The better nutrition they have, the better tomatoes you're going to get. A family isn't your relatives in the plant world. Well, kind of, but it's not your people relatives. But a plant family is an official botanic classification for a group of plants that share similar characteristics, and that's important. For example, apples, pears, plums, raspberries, strawberries, cotoneaster hedge, mountain ash are all in the, and roses are all in the rose family. Now, the reason that's important is because rabbits will go after plants in the rose family because they all have that delicious bark. And so, naturally, apple trees, they're going to go for those. But roses are in that same family. And cotoneaster hedge and rabbits will go for cotoneaster hedge every time. They'll leave other things behind. So knowing the characteristics of that is important, what family a plant belongs to. As long as we were talking about apples, crab apples, persistent fruits, on ornamental crab apples especially, if the tag on a variety says it has persistent fruits, that's good. That means they cling into winter. So the newer varieties of crab apples, of ornamental crab apples, I should say, the ornamental flowering pretty crab apples, if they have persistent fruits, it means that they have decorative fruits that will cling on into winter when all the leaves are gone, and it's decorative and pretty. So persistent fruits are a good thing.
Okay.
Now, the last term that's fascinating is a test winter. Now, I hope we're not going to have a test winter. Now, a test winter refers to a winter in which almost everything goes wrong for a plant. Ooh. It means we have bitter cold, long-lasting cold, maybe record cold temperatures, especially if we don't have much snow cover that helps insulate. So a test winter will oftentimes be an open winter without much insulating snow, so the cold penetrates down into the ground, can damage the root system as well as the tops of the plant. And so the plant breeders sometimes like a test winter because it separates the wheat from the chaff.
Yep.
They'll have a test winter and say, oh, good, if this plant, tree or shrub, perennial, if that survived the test winter, we know it's winter hardy. So a test winter, even though the plant breeders maybe like it because it tests their material, I don't like a test winter because it can cause things to die out. So I'm hoping we're not going to have a test winter. Knock on wood, so far so good. Many of us have good insulating snow. We've had some moderated temperatures. And so I'm hoping the remainder of the winter will not be a test winter.
I hope so too. Well, Don, this has been a lot of fun going over some of these unique terms, unique words, this kind of the gardening verbiage.
Kind of fun to let some of these terms roll out of your mouth, and they're things that are used so frequently in gardening books and gardening talk. That's kind of fun to all be on the same language.
All right, well, if people have questions for you about some words, if they need to know some definitions, or if they have any questions about their garden, or just want to show off something
if you have a favorite word, one of these favorite quirky garden terms, share.
Yes. What's the best way to reach you?
Send me an email, donald.kinsler, KINZLER, @ndsu.edu.
All right. Well, Don, thanks a lot, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, John. Thanks, everyone, for listening.